Standard 7, Assessment. Accomplished teachers of English language learners employ a variety of practices to assess their students appropriately. They use assessment results to shape instruction, to monitor student learning, to assist students in reflecting on their own progress, and to report student progress. Accomplished teachers of English language learners view assessment as an integral part of instruction benefiting both the student and the teacher, while recognizing an obligation to prepare students for high-stakes assessments. Teachers know that assessment of student understanding and progress is a daily informative process at the heart of student-centered teaching. They are adept at using multiple evaluation methods to interpret student understanding and use of language. Teachers employ assessments for a variety of purposes. For example, teachers use assessments to determine appropriate placements of students in an English language proficiency level for instruction. They use content-based assessments and student self-assessments to monitor students' learning and to inform instruction. In addition, teachers use assessments to determine appropriate services for students who may have special needs, including those identified as gifted and talented. As appropriate, teachers communicate assessment results clearly and regularly to students, families, professional colleagues, and community members. Variety in assessment techniques. Accomplished teachers understand the advantages and limitations of a wide range of assessment methods and strategies, both formal and informal, and use them to gauge student progress. Teachers know that linguistically and culturally diverse students often have skills that will not emerge in unfamiliar or uncomfortable settings or during certain evaluations. Teachers address the potential for cultural bias in assessment materials and practices when evaluating their validity. Teachers, therefore, do not rely on any single method of measuring student achievement. They frequently give students opportunities to demonstrate progress in a variety of ways that traditional assessments might inhibit. Teachers understand, for example, that performance-based assessments may have special utility for linguistically and culturally diverse learners. Teachers might provide students with opportunities to display their knowledge through authentic assessments that measure student progress in real-world contexts. Teachers know under what circumstances to assess students in their primary language, and they secure the appropriate resources to do so. Teachers also recognize that students at beginning levels of English language proficiency are sometimes hesitant to respond verbally to questions posed in the classroom, and therefore at times arrange for students to confirm their understanding in ways that do not require public oral responses. For example, teachers might ask students to point to depictions of objects or scenes teachers describe, draw pictures indicating their understanding of words, or follow verbal directions while writing on the board. When appropriate, teachers create their own tools for assessment that might incorporate students' daily classwork, artwork, or exhibits, and might feature a wide range of technological enhancements. Assessment for elementary school students, for instance, might include dramatic performances in which students interpret or reenact stories. A teacher might ask high school students studying media to examine propaganda in television commercials, discuss similarities and differences among advertisements analyzed by classmates, and, as a group, write and film a new commercial showcasing specific propaganda techniques. Teachers seek good matches among students' abilities, instructional goals, and assessment methods, considering the relative strengths and weaknesses of the procedures, as well as the timing, focus, and purpose of each evaluation. Initial placement assessment. Accomplished teachers know how to analyze and interpret assessment data, teacher observations, and other information to determine students' appropriate placement in an English language proficiency level and to ensure that students receive instructional services that meet their needs. Teachers work with other professionals to confirm that English language learners are placed in appropriate content area courses that enable them to succeed in school and allow high school students to earn credits toward graduation. Teachers pay particular attention to students' development in each of the 5 language domains. Teachers may recommend additional assessments to confirm a student's proficiency level and, as necessary, may recommend changes in instructional services. Accomplished teachers understand the value of assessing students in their primary languages at the time of their initial enrollment in school. Even if they do not speak the student's primary language, teachers know that assessment data in the primary language can provide valuable information regarding a student's literacy level. When no formal primary language assessment is available, teachers devise informal ways to ascertain a student's level of reading and writing in the primary language, such as having the student write about a picture. Teachers may advocate for students to be assessed in their primary language in such areas as mathematics to verify proper placement in content classes based on students' knowledge of the subject rather than solely on proficiency in English. Assessment to guide instructional practice. Accomplished teachers, sometimes with the assistance of students, set high yet realistic goals using assessments meaningful to the academic, social, and motivational needs of their students. To achieve these goals, teachers construct formative and summative assessments. Informal formative assessments can be as simple as comprehension checks or listening and reading comprehension tests, whereas summative assessments include end-of-unit tests or cumulative projects. Teachers might incorporate online quizzes that are automatically graded and provide immediate feedback to allow students and teachers to reflect on student progress and plan future lessons. Student portfolios might serve simultaneously as formative and summative assessments. As a formative assessment, a portfolio might help both the teacher and the student determine how to strengthen the learning process. As a summative assessment, a portfolio could establish insight about a student's language proficiency over time. Teachers analyze assessment results and make purposeful adjustments to curriculum and instruction consistent with their findings. Accomplished teachers regularly assess students' language performance to gain perspectives on their ability to apply newly learned language skills in a variety of settings and to guide decisions about how to proceed with instruction. Teachers may tailor assessments to the linguistic needs of varied populations of English language learners. They monitor students' readiness to grasp new ideas and their ability to use language fluently and accurately to communicate understanding. Teachers note and analyze both the form and content of students' responses and the process by which they approach tasks, solve problems, and synthesize and evaluate knowledge. When appropriate, teachers assess students' knowledge of the foundational components of English and content-specific language, and they use assessment data to help students access content area information. Teachers evaluate the willingness of their English language learners to take risks with new vocabulary, grammar, and discourse structures. In assessing students' writing, for example, teachers might evaluate students' ability to use complex clauses, academic word families, transition words, and larger rhetorical structures. Accomplished teachers might collaborate with content teachers to create or use available content area assessments, both formal and informal, to assess English language learners at diverse proficiency levels. They might also encourage the use of primary language assessments as appropriate. On the basis of their findings, teachers anticipate how to proceed with individual students as well as with groups as a whole. The information teachers gather through assessment allows them to reflect on the effectiveness of their instruction. Teachers design, implement, and assess their instructional programs in a cycle of instruction, review, modification, and evaluation. Effective assessments indicate when teachers should move forward with instruction, when they should refine instruction or reteach, and when they should provide students with additional exposure to language and opportunities to use language meaningfully. This contextual examination of instruction enables teachers to maximize student learning. Assessment of student progress in the 5 language domains. Accomplished teachers develop and use appropriate instruments to assess students' facility with specific language features in the 5 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, writing, and visual literacy. Teachers then monitor students' ability to incorporate these features into their language use, and they routinely provide feedback to students about their progress. Teachers implement specific techniques to evaluate students' work and performance and to record assessment information. Listening. Accomplished teachers select and implement listening assessments appropriate to students' English proficiency levels. Teachers assess the ability of students at beginning levels of English proficiency to understand sounds and spoken words and phrases, to understand reduced forms of daily speech such as gonna, wanna, or kinda, to answer inferential questions, and to recognize important facts and take notes from short discussions on a variety of topics. At more advanced levels, students respond to listening passages of increasing length and complexity. Teachers might use texts that ask students with beginning levels of English proficiency to recognize pictures that correspond to spoken words or phrases, to respond physically to directions, and to listen to narratives with accompanying illustrations and then retell what occurs. Teachers might ask students at advanced levels of English language proficiency to listen to a range of topical materials such as broadcasts of great speeches by United States presidents or other popular leaders, as well as to listen to debates and political forums. Speaking. Accomplished teachers systematically access students' oral language development through structured conversations or formal assessments. Examples of appropriate assessments for students with beginning levels of English language proficiency might include oral closed tasks or picture sequencing activities, which ask students to discuss the arrangement of pictures portraying a sequence of actions. Appropriate assessments at intermediate levels of English language proficiency might have students explain the steps to a familiar process or describe the events of a significant occurrence. To determine the language proficiency of students who have developed oral fluency, teachers might use a class-created rubric to assess students' knowledge and use of word prefixes, inflectional endings, modal auxiliaries, pronoun references, and transition words in skits or presentations. Reading. Accomplished teachers assess students' reading abilities at frequent designated intervals. Early in the school year, for example, teachers might administer assessments to determine young students' knowledge of how to use printed materials, of beginning and ending sounds, of rhyming words, and of word concepts. For older students, teachers might assess students' decoding skills, oral fluency, knowledge of vocabulary, including morphology, and reading comprehension. Assessment of reading comprehension might include students' knowledge of the structure of diverse types of texts, both fiction and nonfiction, and of literary elements such as metaphor, as well as their ability to understand complex sentences and pronoun reference, to identify main and supporting ideas, to contrast fact and opinion, and to use inferences, summary, and analysis. Writing. Accomplished teachers assess students' writing to help English language learners produce their best writing and gain language proficiency. To assess the writing skills of English language learners and support their writing development, for instance, teachers might incorporate tasks that include prompts as well as relevant grammatical reminders, word banks to help students with lexical choices, discourse suggestions providing tips on rhetorical structure, or close activities that require students to fill in blanks with words that have been deleted from stories or other texts. Accomplished teachers, often along with their students, are adept at creating and using both holistic and analytic rubrics to evaluate their students' writing. Teachers interpret writing assessment data in the context of their understanding of each individual student and their evaluations of the accomplishments of the class as a whole, and adjust their instructional plans, pace, and objectives accordingly. Visual literacy. Accomplished teachers assess students' ability to understand, analyze, and evaluate visuals for meaning, relevance, and context. They assess students' vocabulary, grammar, and discourse in speech and in writing when interpreting the visual, and their ability to produce or use visuals appropriate to purpose and audience. Teachers are mindful of students' English language proficiency when assessing visual literacy. During a shared reading lesson, for example, early childhood teachers might invite students to choose illustrations from a story to predict what happens next. To assess students' personal and critical responses to visual representations, secondary teachers might ask students to view a series of images and use a concept map to communicate the underlying meaning and intent of the images. Substantive feedback to students. Because accomplished teachers know that well-stated and appropriate feedback can boost students' confidence and inspire their commitment to learning, they provide clear, timely, and constructive feedback to students, reinforcing students' growth, highlighting their improvements, and celebrating their accomplishments. Teachers affirm for students that feedback is both helpful and necessary to learning a new language. Teachers who identify misconceptions and gaps in student knowledge of academic language, for example, might work with students to determine a course of action for improvement that incorporates a logical progression of manageable instructional steps. In the teaching of writing, rather than addressing a wide spectrum of tasks, a teacher might stress specific skills on which a student needs to focus, such as subject-verb or pronoun-referent agreement, the proper placement of adjectives and use of articles, or the construction of plurals and question forms. Teachers acknowledge the benefits of the judicious use of well-structured peer evaluations and instruct students on how to assist classmates with assessment and feedback. For example, a teacher might acquaint students with the purposes and practices of peer feedback by showing a video of students working in collaborative groups, asking students to analyze the language skills they observe, and introducing rubrics or checklists students then use to constructively critique their classmates' language learning. Teachers recognize that purposeful feedback, one component of a range of effective assessment strategies, provides students with important perspectives on their own language learning. To be continued in Part 2.